Hi everyone, welcome to Fridays with FEMA. This is episode 21. I'm Ashish.
I'm Janisha.
While we do this, of course, on every Friday, but I think the PN3, the amendment to PN3, which is now a PN2, has been issued earlier today, and therefore we thought to come and discuss that with you very quickly. Janisha, first initial thoughts on the new law.
So, of course, a welcome move. I think finally there's a definition on beneficial ownership, right? So, that's, of course, good news. But let's deep dive into, does it raise more questions, and or are we
Yeah,
super clear about it, right? I think, Ashish, the first and foremost point that we saw, right, when you were evaluating the law earlier today was that initially the language said that if a beneficial owner is a citizen of or is situated in a land bordering country, that investment required governmental approval. Now the language reads a beneficial owner who's a citizen of a land bordering country, that requires governmental approval. And of
right.
course, while we'll come into the beneficial ownership tests and all, I think one important change that we see out here is beneficial ownership is limited to citizenship in a land bordering country. So if I'm a permanent resident in Hong Kong, but I'm not a citizen of Hong Kong, I will not be considered to be within the purview of this particular provision, which
Sure,
requires evaluation or approval in the first place.
sure.
I'll not be considered a beneficial owner only because I'm not a citizen of the land bordering entity. So I don't.
Correct.
This evaluation is not applicable to me.
Correct. So I think the word situated in, which is there in the previous law, is now no longer present in the press note that has been issued,
Yeah.
and thereby restricting this meaning to citizens
Correct.
only.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what happens for transfers that are taking place
Yeah.
now with the new circular?
Yeah, so I think again aligned to the old law, the new law also clarifies that if there's a transfer which results, so today a company does not have a beneficial owner who's in the land bordering country, but if that investor is transferring to another investor who has a beneficial owner in the land bordering country, you before this transfer you require governmental approval, pretty much in line with what's currently also stated.
Sure.
So yes, so this evaluation is required not only at the time of receiving of primary investment, but also at the time of the
Transfer.
secondaries. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Coming finally to the question with respect to the threshold, right? So the threshold has now been linked to the PMLA, which basically prescribes the 10% threshold to determine beneficial ownership.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that now, Janisha.
Yeah, so I think what it's saying is if you go to PMLA and the rules under PMLA Rule 9(3), that is prescribing for a natural person who's directly or indirectly owning more than 10%, in case of a company, more than 10% of the shares of the company, in case of a partnership interest, more than 10% of
Partnership
the
interest.
partnership
Yeah.
interest, in case of a trust, more than 10% of the interest in the trust, etc., right? So the threshold now is 10%. Now, having said that, I think what's interesting is, so one important thing is you have to determine the threshold vis-a-vis the investing company. So, for example, I have an investing company in United States of America, which is investing in an Indian company. I need to determine if there is any person, any natural person at the US entity level, which either directly or indirectly owns 10% or more in the US entity,
Right.
right? And let's say there is a person, let's say Ashish is that person who owns more than 10% in this US entity. Now, is Ashish a citizen of the land bordering country? If the answer to that is yes, then this investment will require prior approval. Now, this brings us to the question, see, if Ashish directly owns 11% in the US investing entity, it's pretty clear he directly owns more than 10%. But how do you determine the indirect ownership of Ashish in the US entity, right? Now, let's assume the US entity is 100% held by a Singapore entity, and 10% of the Singapore entity is held by a Hong Kong entity, which is a land bordering country, right? Now,
So Hong Kong is holding 10% of Singapore. Singapore is holding 100% of the US, and the US is making investment into India. Correct.
that's right, that's right. And now, am I going to look at Hong Kong holds 10% in Singapore and Singapore holds 100%? So on a look through basis, Hong Kong holds 10%. Am I going to look at it in that manner when I'm determining indirect shareholding, or am I going to see that Hong Kong, where does Hong Kong control Singapore? Because Singapore holds more than 10% in the US entity, right? So, so am I going to see the second test that Hong Kong is owning more than, is controlling Singapore? It could be a control test, it could be economic ownership, it could be anything, right? So, what would be the test? In our view, the test should be the latter. Does Hong Kong control the Singapore entity?
Which is holding more than
Which is
10%.
holding more than 10% in the US investing entity. That should be the test. It should not be on a look through basis, pretty much also in line with a lot of other laws, right? Even under Companies Act, when we talk about the SBO test, this is how you do the analysis of indirect ownership, and also in sync with the objective of PN3, right? The idea is that a controlling stake should not indirectly come into India without the without any approval, right? So so I think that's how I would read it. And actually, this is important why I have taken a body corporate in my example and not an individual, because very interestingly, while the law pegs the threshold of evaluation of a beneficial owner to the PMLA rules, there's also proviso which says that, which is overarching, right? Irrespective of what the PMLA rules come to the conclusion, it says that if any individual who's a citizen of a land bordering country, or any entity which is incorporated in land bordering country, if it directly or indirectly holds more than 10% in the investing company or controls the investing company, it's also going to require the governmental approval, right? And that's where understanding how does indirect control come into the picture become relevant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to note is that while on one hand they have mentioned that the beneficial owner should be a natural person, but this overarching provision actually
Yeah.
goes ahead and says that even if there is a entity which is holding directly or indirectly more than 10% or has control in the investing entity, then it is going to result in a breach of the 10% threshold basically, and therefore you need government approval.
Absolutely.
So what is what this entails basically is that if in a chain of companies which is finally investing into India, even if there is an entity somewhere in the middle which is actually holding more than 10% or has control
The investing
over
company.
the investing entity, then that automatically will result in requiring approval from the government before that investment can come into
Correct.
India, right?
Correct.
And therefore, this will require uh, every Indian entity receiving money from offshore to understand at what, I mean, how many levels are there. That's number one. And secondly, if there is any entity which is first holding a which is within the land bordering country, and what kind of rights does that entity have with respect to the investing entity, for us to be able to demonstrate whether or not there is control at 10%, and thereby whether the investment is under the automatic route now or will it require government approval.
Absolutely. I think this is, as you very rightly said, that while the law talks about beneficial owner being a natural person because it says it has to be citizen, the proviso talks about even in the chain, if there is a land entity in the land bordering nations, if that entity holds more than 10% of controls the investing company, that's a problem. I think what they're trying to look at situations where your maybe a beneficial owner may not be a citizen, but you have an entity in the chain which is in the land bordering country, that's a problem. And as Ashish said, that means that this requires a step by step, layer by layer evaluation, and which now also brings us to another important question: what really is control, right? The This press note 2 does not of 2026 does not define control. So I don't know if there's going to be a separate definition inserted for this purpose when we see the amendment to the NDI rules. But assuming that's not the case, then we are guided by the general definition of control and the NDI rules, which links it to Companies Act. And Companies Act says control is, it includes, it's an expansive definition, right to appoint majority of the directors, or having control over the management and policy decisions of a company, right? And that may be through voting agreements or in any other manner. So very wide definition of control. as as you might infer, it's a subjective test. And going back to Ashish's point, hence this evaluation needs to happen at every level. So what the new law does not take away is the whole exercise of evaluating every level. I think that process still would continue. And I think another third important limb in that proviso is that a person, a natural person who's a citizen of a land bordering country or an entity in land bordering country should not even have ultimate effective control over the investee entity. Now, we are very puzzled as to what are the situations where uh, the individual or the entity in the land bordering company may not have control over the investing entity, right? The US entity in our example, but still has ultimate control over the Indian entity, because the law believes that there might be such a situation, and it's very careful to say it has no control over no has no ultimate effective control over the Indian entity in any manner whatsoever. So a lot of times in case of foreign investments, especially in joint ventures by a foreign partner, there might be technology collaboration agreements, right? And I think a lot of those agreements will also now come under the purview, and it will be looked at to examine that, okay, as per your investment, you do not have control in the chain, but is there any entity in the investor chain which is in a land bordering country, and through any any agreements, like a technology collaboration agreement, are they really exercising control over the Indian entity? Probably that might be
Absolutely. I think, see, if you look at the definition of control, one of the limbs is policy making, right?
Yeah,
Now, whether agreements like this can result in uh,
yeah,
control over the policy of the Indian entity is a question that will need
absolutely.
to be answered on a case by
Case by
case
case
basis.
basis.
And therefore, to that extent, if that can be considered really to be control, and
Correct.
therefore that third limb gets activated, where
Absolutely.
if you are having control directly at the Indian entity level and you are coming in through an through a entity in an LBC, then you will have to go and take government approval.
Absolutely.
But
And
extremely subjective. I think.
yeah, it's a very subjective.
Yeah, it has to be looked at considering all factors with respect to such an agreement that is
Yeah.
being made.
Yeah. And I think two additional points, right, Ashish? I think one is, if an Indian investing company is receiving downstream investments from another Indian entity which is foreign owned and controlled, then it would be considered as indirect foreign investment for that Indian entity, and that would require compliance with the NDI rules and the provisions in general. But I think it is going to be the investing entity who will be in the position to ensure compliance with the amended PN3 note, right? Because the recipient investing and the investee entity in this case may not really be in a position to do the evaluation. So I think a little bit of clarification. I think it can be inferred under the law that it's the investing company which is responsible, but I think a slight clarification on that in the fine text might also help. And I think lastly, I think another rule that's come in is, if somewhere in the chain there is still a beneficial owner or an investor who is a citizen of China, or maybe an entity in China, but is less than 10%.
Any land bordering.
Yeah, any land bordering country, not just China. Um, but does not require an approval because you're less than 10% and don't have control. However, this still needs to be reported. And what is the format of reporting going to be like? That's yet to be seen. But I think this is going to be quite cumbersome, right? And I think, as we were discussing, that the amendment does not change the requirement of doing a step by step, layer by layer analysis. While there are some tests now prescribed, I think the requirement of analysis remains, if for nothing, for ensuring which all investments do you need to actually do a reporting for. And I think it's going to be quite challenging from a fund perspective, or in case of companies where there are multiple shareholders, to sort of look at this sort of.
1% in the investing entity
Yeah.
and coming through an LBC, you don't
Yeah.
require government approval, but you still need to do a reporting. I mean,
Yeah.
that's mind numbing.
Yeah. And I hope there is a provision in the reporting requirements which says that it's not applicable if you have a listed company in the chain, because even the PMLA provides that you do not need to go above that if there is a listed company in place. So I think these are some of our preliminary thoughts, and yeah, I think this is going to be effective once it's notified in the NDI rules. There might be some different verbiage or language in the NDI rules, and more on this. And yeah, so
And I think we'll discuss it again once we have the NDI rules and what changes are there.
correct. In the meantime, if you all have any questions, please share those questions with us on our email IDs, which is available in the link below, and we would be more than happy to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.